We've got some new names to talk about this morning. We've got some Arsenal exits and, of course, all the latest transfer news in this morning's Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show. Join you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routines. It's incredibly appreciated. I hope you're doing having a fantastic weekend so far. If you could be ever so kind to drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new. We are actually incredibly close to hitting the next milestone on the channel, which I think is 57,000 subscribers. In fact, we're only 14 away. So maybe we can do it during the show. So if you're new, subscribe and help us to our next target. Good morning to those joining us live in the chat box. Thank you as always. Brad, Glenn, Peekahoo, Damien, Darren, Paul, Steve, Louis, Kaiser, Blackshine, Shari, Matt G, Jose, Stephen, Franklin, and Bakar Lasagna, Arasilki, Sean, Chris, we got Pablo, we've got Barry, we've got John and James and Ronald and Vivian and plenty more of you guys and girls as well. Thank you, as always, for joining me. And I hope, as I said before, that you're doing good and well. And thank you for those that are listening, of course, on catch-up, either on audio platforms or listening back on YouTube at a later time, because I understand that these morning shows are tricky for some of you, depending on your time zone. But thank you for catching up as well. Right, let's jump into today's stories. We start, though, with a very serious message, and one that comes with all the love and support of TGT. You may have seen some messages on social media yesterday regarding very good friend of the channel, Super Kevin Campbell. I'm not going to go into any of the finer details of what's going on, because I think it's important that we also respect Kevin's privacy. But I think it's all good for us to send a very collaborative and collective message of support to Kevin and those close to him, going through obviously a very tricky period. So stay strong, Kev. You've got all our support here at TGT, and we are wishing you all the very best. Please, please do get well soon. Moving into Arsenal's stories, though, we kick off with more of a Arsenal indirect story. Real Madrid have won the Champions League yet again after a 2-0 victory over Borussia Dortmund. Goals from Dani Carvajal and Vinicius Jr. are enough to secure them the trophy, despite the fact that Borussia Dortmund, I would argue, were the better side in the first half. Real Madrid, if you do not punish them, will eventually find their way to winning again. And that is exactly what happened. Toni Kroos bowing out of club football with the biggest trophy in the domestic season. He will play for Germany at the European Championships this summer before hanging up his boots entirely. Marco Reus, of course, finishing his time with Borussia Dortmund as well. Mats Hummels potentially as well. But it was Real Madrid that managed to bring home the story and the trophy. So congratulations to Real Madrid. Again, I think just going back to that point about finishing your chances, there's definitely some similarities you can make with kind of this game being something of a microcosm of Arsenal's season. Looked so good, looked and had so much promise, but when it came to those big chances like we did and had against Aston Villa that we didn't take, ultimately we ended up being punished by the inevitability of Man City, just like Real Madrid punished the German side with the inevitability that they have in this competition. Moving into more Arsenal direct stories, though, and Joshua Kimmich has actually spoken out about his future. He says, "It doesn't just depend on me. What does the club want? FC Bayern remains my first point of contact. Talks will take place about my future. I've still got 1 year left on my contract." We know that Joshua Kimmich was a player that could indeed leave Bayern during the summer, and Arsenal were one of the teams being mentioned as monitoring this situation along with Barcelona as well. I'd love to see Joshua Kimmich come to Arsenal. I think it'd be a really sweet and, just very astute addition to the team as well. So let's look forwards to seeing any updates on this story, but it wouldn't be... I'm not saying that this is going to happen because it's certainly, I think, an unrealistic potential signing. I think he is much more likely to go elsewhere. But who knows? Things can change always very quickly in this business. Now, this is an interesting story. AC Milan are said to be prioritising a move for Jakub Kiwior as a summer signing. Of course, they're going through some managerial changes, but it's said, according to Italian media, that regardless of those managerial changes in Milan, that they will be looking to try and sign Jakub Kiwior. Now, we know that interest from Milan in Kiwior has existed for quite some time. They were keen on him before he left Spezia to join Arsenal. They were keen on him in the January window of earlier in the season. And of course, they're said now to still be keen on the Poland international, who can play, as we know, at left centre-back and as a left-back as well. It is a player that I think if Arsenal could make a significant profit on, so you're looking upwards of 25 to 30 million pounds on Jakub Kiwior, I think it's one that the club would certainly entertain, because he's not necessarily playing loads of minutes. Yes, he played quite a few last season, but with Yuri and Timber out, there was a big reason why he played as limited as he can. And if you can make a profit on a player that isn't an integral part of your side, you probably should be looking to try and do that. You know, it's certainly something that Arsenal, I think, would be open about if they can get a good amount of money for the player. But I rate him. I think he's a good player. I'm happy if he stays. If he does go, he goes. And I think that shows you the recruitment that we've done now, is that we've got players that we're willing to sell, but also we're in a position whereby we don't have to, because they are good enough to still be parts of the squad. And interestingly, it links quite into the Mail's recent report regarding Barcelona 19-year-old Mikayil Faye, who is a player that I know, again, next to nothing about. He is a Senegalese international, senior international, who's got one cap so far for Senegal at 19 years of age. He's a left-sided centre-half that can also play at left-back. He hasn't yet made, I don't believe, a senior appearance for Barcelona, but he has been on the bench for Barca a few times in La Liga. He played 33 games last season in the youth division of Spanish football for the Barcelona side, making 33 appearances, as I say, scored 4 goals, and is incredibly highly rated, it seems, to have that 17 million price attached to him. So it could be that Arsenal see him as a potential Yoral Hato alternative, and obviously a replacement in the long term for Jakub Kiwior to come into the side as well. But that's according to the Mail, and we'll be interested to see any updates on this one. We'll give you as and when they occur. But I've heard nothing on that particular story, just to give you my side of things. And lastly, Florian Pletterberg, of course, Sky Germany, reporting yesterday that Arsenal are indeed pushing to sign Benjamin Sesko. However, a final decision has not yet been made. We had that report, of course, from John Cross suggesting that Sesko had said yes to Arsenal in terms of being open to that deal, but that obviously negotiations were still ongoing. Florian Pletterberg slightly disagreeing, saying that nothing's been decided yet in terms of his future. There are other teams interested in the 21-year-old. Leipzig still want to keep Sesko as well. They don't have control when it comes to the release clause, which, as I've mentioned before, is £55.6 million. I think if Arsenal are desperate to get this deal done, they need to be looking at trying to activate that clause as soon as possible. However, of course, you can't just activate a release clause and then the deal is done. The player has to be convinced, the player has to want to join, and has to be agreed on personal terms with the club as well. So it's not just as simple as activating the release clause and they join the club, because the player has also got to be convinced that this is the right pathway, the right project. According to John Cross of the Mirror's story yesterday, or a couple of days ago, you'd assume that that was indeed the case. So hopefully it is a deal that Arsenal can get done early on in the window, and then we'll wait and see how indeed it transpires. We'll keep you updated with any further news on this line. You can, of course, win a signed and framed Martin Ødegaard shirt. You can go to the link down in the description. There is less than 2/3, I think, or just maybe slightly more. No, just definitely less than 2/3 of the tickets remaining in this competition. There is just over 3 days left for you to get your tickets as well. It's UK only. There are some instant win prizes too. Just by entering, you put yourself in with a chance of winning a signed and framed Declan Rice shirt and an Alexander Zinchenko signed and framed Arsenal boots as well. So best of luck to all of you that get involved with this, and I look forward to hearing if any of you are indeed successful. Right, let's go to part 2 and your questions right after this. Okay, part 2 of the show where we jump into the chat box and see what is happening. Let's go to Sir Nicholas. Says, Tom, if you can make 20 to 30 million on him and not sell him for 20, 30 million on top of what we paid for him, I think that a player, obviously, that like Kiwior, who is not a starter for Arsenal, that cost us about £20 million, and that would obviously been staggered and all of the different add-ons and structures of that deal as well. So we don't even know how much of that 20 million has necessarily been paid. But what I would say is that, you can't just assume that you're going to get 40 odd million quid, especially from an Italian side. The Italian league is not necessarily always, besides Inter, and even Inter themselves have had financial difficulties. It depends upon the clubs that are interested. It depends on how many clubs are interested. It depends on the age of the player. Sometimes it depends on the nationality of the player, if they're homegrown, for instance. Jakub Kiwior is not going to get you much more, I think, than £30 million. I could be proven wrong, but I would be estimating around that figure as to what we would. And for the record, nothing I say has any bearing on how much Arsenal sell players for. So please don't be leaving your comments saying, Tom's underselling our players. Tom, you got to stop putting our players down, blah, 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 blah. It has no bearing on what happens with Arsenal and sales. I could be right. I could be wrong. Last summer, I was pretty spot on with Balogun, as I've mentioned 100 times already. So I feel as though I'm relatively accurate when it comes to predicting these player sales. In fact, I did a whole piece for Football London last week talking about, I think I put a rough estimate of what I expect all of our players to be sold for. So go back and have that a read if you haven't yet checked it out. Owen says, Tom, are there any free agents available this summer that could make a genuine impact in our squad? Maybe a number 2 goalkeeper. Of course, we've just seen Tosin Adarabioyo join Chelsea from Fulham on a free deal as well. In terms of players whose deals are expiring at the end of this season, you've got Adrian Rabiot, you've got Mario Hermoso, you've got Guido Rodriguez of Real Betis, you've got Varane, of course, who we expect probably to be going off to Saudi Arabia maybe. Lloyd Kelly looks to be joining Newcastle. Rafa, Benfica, winger, 31 years of age. Wilfred Ndidi, not sure what's happening with him. 27 years of age. Leicester City midfielder, of course, don't know. Daichi Kamada, I believe, is joining Crystal Palace, actually, on a free deal. I think I saw that story yesterday. Who else have we got here? I'm not looking at anyone really as that can make a genuine impact in this team. Nicolas Pepe, remember him? Bertrand Traore, Christian Kwame. I think he was linked with Arsenal quite a long time ago, actually, as well. Another blast from the past, Michy Batshuayi, as well. Another one becoming a free deal. But beyond that, yeah, it's not looking too likely that any of these really would make too much of an impact. So no, I'm going to go with no, unless I'm missing anybody. I'm going to go with no. I don't think there are any real free agents that would be necessarily the right ones for us. Chris says, are the Smith Rowe Napoli links legit? Considering that's the first I've heard of it, I don't know. Let's have a quick look. Napoli set sights on Smith Rowe. Who is suggesting this? According to Corriere dello Sport, how Napoli are keeping a close eye on Smith Rowe ahead of the summer, appreciating his talents and aware of the transfer market opportunity. His current contract expires in 2026. So there you go. It was Corriere dello Sport. So make of that what you will. I've heard zero regarding that and Smith Rowe and Napoli. Who knows? Could it be a surprise one? We know that Antonio Conte is going to be their coach for next season too. John says, will Sesko feature in the Euros? Yes, he will be leading the line for Slovenia in the summer. So you'll be able to watch plenty of him play for his nation. Pratim says, any news on Tierney? Only that he is expected, of course, to return to the club in the summer and a decision is expected to be made. I imagine it will be that a sale is the next step for Kieran Tierney. I think he has 1 year left on his contract, so Arsenal should be looking for upwards, I think, of around 15 to 20 if they can. If they got 20 million, it would be absolutely brilliant, but 15 million, I think, is probably around that figure more likely, considering the length of time left on his deal. Nicholas says, what would be your ideal and realistic summer window looking like for outgoings and their prices in terms of what they fetch? It's interesting you to say that, Nicholas, because as I said, if you go and give a read to the article that I wrote ever so recently, in fact, I'll find it for you and I'll put it into the link. I'll put it into the chat box for you. Here you go. I'll even put it into the video description today, so those that are listening on catch up can also give it a read as well. Go give that piece a read, and it's an estimation of what I think all those players should really be looking at getting for Arsenal. So you've got Ramsdale, Zinchenko, Tierney, Tavares, Partey, Lokonga, Smith Rowe, Vieira, Nketiah, and Reece Nelson. I didn't do Kiwior, interestingly, because he wasn't really being linked at the time I wrote it, but maybe one that I'll need to add in at a later date and do an updated version in a month's time. Rob says, I heard good things about Pepe a few years ago. It might be worth a punt, but no more than £72 million worth of a signing. Indeed. Chris says, I thought Tierney had 2 years left. Let me check. I could be wrong. So I'll hold my hands up indeed if I am. His contract runs out. I am wrong. 2026. You're right. 2026. So you were indeed correct. There is 2 years remaining on his Arsenal contract, and so therefore, I still think that 50 million is probably right. To be fair, it's probably right in that regard, in that case. So I wouldn't expect anything other than anything more than that. Really, maybe you could get that. Maybe you could get the 20 million. I think it's tricky. I think it's tricky to expect that that's going to be, it's going to happen any more than that. But there you go. But yeah, you're right, Chris. It is 2 years. Game Shot says, isn't it mad to sell Ramsdale without making a profit? Buying a new and probably worse goalkeeper will basically cost as much and make us weaker. Let's have the best number 2 in the world for a payday. I mean, he cost £24 million with add-ons, which I don't think there's been. There would have been some of those activated up to that £30 million total price tag. But I still think we should make a profit on Ramsdale. And at the end of the day, he wants to move. There is an incentive for him to move. You can't keep unhappy players in the group. It's not necessarily great for the dressing room. You need to do what's best for the group. And moving Ramsdale on, it will be that decision as well. We've got a better goalkeeper in David Raya. So you've got a better starter. If we can go and find a very good second choice, we seemingly link with that Justin Bilo of Feyenoord, I think would be a very good number 2 for Arsenal. Probably as good as Ramsdale and probably more suited to the style of goalkeeper that Mikel Arteta wants. I think it still works absolutely fine. Ben says, I still find it absolutely insane that our record sale is Oxlade-Chamberlain for less than 40 million. Pretty disgraceful compared to the record sales of every other big 6 side. I mean, to a degree, the difference is obviously that Arsenal are now only in a position where they're just competing for like the titles and stuff like that. Chelsea, Liverpool, City have been sides that have competed for titles, in the not so recent past, especially in the case of City and Liverpool. Obviously, Chelsea obviously have been in a position where they aren't competing now, but certainly were competing only half a decade ago for the title, or just over that. So I don't necessarily think that you can look at it and think it's a disgrace, because Arsenal are only putting themselves into a position where they are going to be able to sell players more effectively. If you go back and actually look at Manchester United and their sales history, another side quite similar to Arsenal, if you like, the only major sale that they have been able to make in the last, 9 to 10 years, I think since 2016, so we're going back 8 years, the only sale that they have ever made, I think, that went for more than £30 million was Lukaku. I'm just double checking this now, but I think that he was the only player. Dan James went for about 25 million. Lukaku went, I think, for 60 to 65 million to Inter. Yeah, you are going back. The next one after that is Di Maria. Again, a player that they spent huge sums of money on, of course, to bring in from Real Madrid. They sold him for about 50 million to PSG, and obviously went on to do very well there. But even after that, like, you're going back even further. So if you're going back the last 8 years, it's just Lukaku. If you go back beyond that for Manchester United, you're looking at the next big sale was Ronaldo to Real Madrid. That's how far you're going back. And the similarities between Arsenal and Manchester United are that both of those sides, up until recently for Arsenal, were kind of in this purgatorial limbo state. They weren't established at the top of the elite table since, of course, Sir Alex Ferguson left, and of course now up until the point that we last competed for a title, really prior to the last couple of seasons, which was, the Invincibles and the late noughties, I suppose. So if you're not in a position where you're established as a title challenger, your players that would actually get you a decent amount of money are key players for you. They're key starters for you. So if you're a club like Chelsea, if you're a club like Liverpool, if you're a club like City, where you don't necessarily need to sell, where the depth of your squad is greater because you're competing for titles, and so other players that could potentially start for you, but you have enough resources and you have the potential to improve and invest in other players, you can then sell those players for significantly more money. But if you're in a position like Arsenal and Manchester United have been for a long time, where they haven't been competitive in the league and they're kind of just ticking over until recently for Arsenal, where they've been improving under Arteta and now they are in a position they're competing for titles, not every single player that is in your squad is integral, and so therefore you could sell them, like Kiwior for 30 million plus, like Smith Rowe potentially for 30 million plus. But again, we don't necessarily yet have those players that we would be selling for loads and loads and loads of money. And also we talk about we talk about Chelsea. Sorry, we'll talk about Chelsea and Liverpool, for instance. I mean, I think I've done this before on the channel, but everyone referenced Solanke or Rhian Brewster or Jordan Ibe. But actually, when you go back over the years of more recent history of clubs like Liverpool, the only big deal that they've done was like Fabinho, who went to Saudi Arabia. So there's a bit of an asterisk there because of the inflated price tag there. Nico Williams, they got about £15 million for. Sadio Mane went to Bayern Munich, but it's Sadio Mane. So they got him for, I think, about £25 million. But then you're going back and I'm now in 21. The most they got was 10 million for Harry Wilson. 2020, 8 million for Dejan Lovren. Danny Ings, 20 million to Southampton in 2019. Solanke in 2018, as we talk about a lot, for around 17, 18 million pounds. Philippe Coutinho then is the big one in 2017. And I think I saw another comment that was related to that point about Ramsdale. Let me try and find it because I think it was important. Game Shot says it's big club mentality. Luis Suarez didn't stop performing for Liverpool when they hold on to him. Neither did Coutinho. Difference between that and why this is not a good example is the difference between those players and Ramsdale is that Suarez and Coutinho were starting every single week. And also, not only that, but both of those players had assurances in their contracts that if a club like Barcelona came in for them, Liverpool in a year's time would allow them to go. Suarez actually signed a brand new contract that included that clause that would allow Barcelona to come in and sign him if indeed they didn't do whatever. I think it was even just in a year's time they could sign him for a certain amount of cost. Coutinho played and started up until the summer that there was a big transfer saga surrounding him. There wasn't necessarily loads and loads of rumors like there was with Suarez a year or two before he left. You know, it was actually that summer that Coutinho ended up leaving, or the season that Coutinho ended up leaving, and they got that 100 million plus price tag for him. There is not a comparison between Suarez and Coutinho for Liverpool and their mentality and Ramsdale, who is a backup goalkeeper to our current starter. It's nothing like that. They are completely different. And to be fair, following up, says Sesko should have been our biggest sale once again. I mean, wasn't Sesko sold in when was Sesko sold? Let me see if I can find the year. Was it 2010? Let me have a look. Arsenal, all transfers. When was Cesc Fabregas sold? You're going back to 2011, right? And 2011, I believe in 2011, he was our record sale, was he not? I'm going back further and further and further. I'm trying to see if there's anyone. I think when we sold Cesc Fabregas, he went for 30 million plus. That was our record sale. Nicholas Anelka as well, similar price tag. So it's between Anelka and Fabregas. I think though Fabregas became our record. Maybe it remained Anelka a bit, but it was very close between the two. And it was 2011. Like, it's not, if that Fabregas sale had happened today, you would be looking at 80, 90 million pounds if Cesc Fabregas was going to leave. I think I saw a really good indication of, not an indication, that's the wrong word, but there was like a graphic I saw the other day, and it was like inflation for price tags of players, like for Chelsea, and the players of what they would be worth if they were bought today. And there were players in there like Fabio Carvalho and I think not Ramirez, who was the other one that they signed. Some of the other players they signed basically back when Jose Mourinho was around, how much they would be worth today if they'd have bought them. And it gave you a better understanding of actually how much Chelsea spent contextually back in those days. So, yeah, it was crazy. John says, 2011, Tom was a teenager. I was 16. So yeah, I was a teenager. Vegas Gunner says, Tom, do you know what the Premier League clubs will be in the Club World Cup? I read that each club gets 50 million. I don't know if we will. Cup who has qualified for the Club World Cup? I don't know if we're in it. I'm not sure that we are. I think that I have a feeling that Salzburg are in it instead of us. I'm trying to see if there's any indications about who is in it. Clubs that have qualified for the FIFA Club World Cup. It's the new format, the full list of teams. Yeah, I don't know when the new format comes in, but all I'm seeing is articles about 2025, which is not. FIFA's new 32-team tournament. The teams qualified. Okay, here we go. So, qualified clubs for the 2025 Club World Cup for next year. So, it'll be next, not the season coming, the season after that. Bayern Munich, Borussia Dortmund, Real Madrid, Man City, Chelsea, Inter, PSG, Benfica, Porto, Salzburg, I thought it was, Juve, Atletico Madrid. They are the UEFA qualified sides. You've then got Palmeiras, Flamengo, Fluminense, Auckland City, Al Ahly, Wydad, Casablanca, Al Hilal, Urawa Red Diamonds, Monterrey, Seattle Sounders, and Club Leon. They are all the teams that have qualified for the 2025 Club World Cup. So it's basically done, I believe, on coefficients. So Liverpool, Arsenal, and Liverpool, Arsenal, and United all missed out as far as I'm aware in this current iteration of that tournament. It's interesting. I suppose it's not too bad missing out on the first iteration of this tournament, because the first iteration of it is going to be an interesting kind of view, I suppose, of what it is, how people view it. Is it seen as a major trophy if you win it? If Arsenal had piled loads of resources into it, got it, and then it was seen as something other than a bit of a money grab, which you could argue it still is, allegedly. So I think that there's this potential for Arsenal to get back into that competition in the future and, have it as a potential trophy to win. But it's really what's the word? Unknown. It's really unknown about how anyone's going to view that competition going forwards. Cass says, to be honest, Tom, Arsenal are not great at selling the players, and it would be interesting not only this season but over the next few seasons to see how much Arsenal will get in sales. Without question, this whole thing that we've been talking about in terms of player sales is not some big defense of Arsenal, like, oh, Arsenal are actually really good sellers. They're not. Arsenal need to be better at selling. All we've talked about here is kind of the context, if you like, as to why Arsenal have not necessarily been able to sell like some other sides have more recently. I hope that came across. I think it's a really interesting point of view to look at it from the point of Manchester United and Arsenal, who have been two sides that have been something of sleeping giants. United still are, arguably. Arsenal, of course, certainly have woken up more recently to compete at the elite level more consistently. And that means, of course, the players that they would have as sellable assets, they need. So you're not looking to sell those players. You're not going to sell those players, So when Arsenal were a selling club back in the late noughties, early 2010s, they were letting players go because of the stadium situation. And contextually, those players were going for big fees, like Fabregas, like Nasri, to a lesser degree. Van Persie, of course, I think it was £24 million at the time. He only had 1 year left on his deal. But yeah, I don't think there's too much to complain about really in regards to Arsenal's record sales, because all the players that we would sell for huge amounts of money, we need and have needed. So yeah, I don't think so. Game Shot says Sesko was cheap at the time as well. His age and talent and contract length should have warranted a bigger sum, no matter what the money would have been today. I disagree. I don't think it contextually is too cheap considering the fees that were around back then. I really don't. I don't think it was contextually like a cheap deal at all. And Neil says, do you go for a medium or a hot at Nando's? Depends how I'm feeling. Most of the time hot, sometimes medium. Depends how I'm feeling that day. Let's go to Fargo says, surely we can discern from our recent contract policies that there's a strategy to generate value from all of our assets. Absolutely. And we are far better at keeping hold of players and extending contracts and being in stronger positions from a negotiation standpoint with players. Like you look at Ramsdale now, we don't have any pressure to sell him because we signed him up to a brand new contract. So we can keep him as long as we need to keep him. until we get the price tag that we deem to be good enough. Cool Gamers Zone, sorry. It's Hayes. Hey, Tom, do you think resting players like Saka could see us change formation? The signings to me seem to aim towards formation flexibility because we know Mikayil likes to be unpredictable, but have something of a depth limit at the moment. I think that there's definitely scope for Arsenal to be a bit more malleable in the way that they play. I know that Pep Guardiola has got a lot of success in changing the structure of his team in certain fixtures, especially against really big sides and big, high-profile games. We need to be better at that. Arteta needs to be better at his in-game management. We know that's one of the weaker sides of his characteristics and his traits, and that's something that hopefully into next season that we get better at. So, yeah, I think that you've got some... there's definitely scope there to see where that the value of that comment comes from. Raf says, does Arteta need to be more conscious of player sales? Arteta knew Raya would be the first choice. Should he have let Rambo go last summer when he was rated more highly with the Ainsley Maitland-Niles? I mean, Ainsley Maitland-Niles, was that under Arteta? I'm trying. It was so long ago now. Wolves sale. When did August 2020. So it was the first summer window that Arteta was here that Maitland-Niles, we rejected that 50 million bid from Wolves. We look back at that, and look at it as a mistake. And, we just won the FA Cup with Maitland-Niles as a key part of that starting 11. And there was a feeling that maybe Maitland-Niles could still have a future with Arsenal. We look back with the benefit of hindsight now and say, oh, what a mistake that was, And we should have taken the 15 to 20 million because it turned out that it wasn't. He wasn't a player that ended up having that future. But at the time, we just won the FA Cup and he played a key part in that game and was a key part of that starting 11 as well. So we look back at it with hindsight and say, yeah, we should have sold that. But I think that the Ramsdale thing, the only criticism that I've got with the Ramsdale situation was that he didn't start games in the Champions League group stage. I felt like we could have started him in more games in the group stage because that would have put him more into the shop window, would have maybe kept him happier, would have maybe, not created as much of a talking point at the time. Because at the time, I feel like every morning show we ended up talking about Ramsdale and Raya in that situation where maybe if he was playing those Champions League games, well, I don't think that would have impacted the results at all, in terms of what happened in those games. I really don't think it would have changed things too much, but it could have had more benefits than drawbacks to playing Ramsdale in those group stage games. So it's a tricky one. Where's Maitland-Niles now? John says at Lyon, I believe. I think he's been playing at Lyon. Just checking his contract with Lyon. He's there until 2027. So he signed a long-term contract as a free agent, I believe, with Lyon. He's I don't know how well he's done. Last season he played 23 games, scored 1 goal, got 4 assists. And, of course, he did spend some time at Roma. I think that was on loan from Arsenal. But he was mainly a bench player in the first half of the season, then gradually established himself much more as a right-back and then a left-back at times as well. He's very much still that utility player, can play multiple positions, has played midfield, started the season playing in midfield and then moved into those full-back positions. The biggest problem that Maitland-Niles had was that he could never really settle on what he wanted to do, or rather he had in his mind what he wanted to do. But what happened there was ultimately he could never specialize. And so he could never flourish because he was always somewhat, I think, distracted in his head about what he was wanting and ended up doing. So now he's maybe accepted things. He's playing more regularly with Lacazette. Yes, Chris, at Lyon. Ben says, did we start Ramsdale in the FA Cup game that we lost? I feel like we absolutely could have played him more. I think we did. I think he started against Liverpool because I remember him playing that really long ball through to Reece Nelson in the early part of that game against Liverpool. Yes, we started Reece Nelson against Liverpool in the FA Cup. Let's go to Neil says, any plans to get James B back on the show? You might see James B on this channel in the relative near future. Yes, Neil, we definitely do have plans. James is a fantastic commentator of the game and he's welcome back always. Owen says, do any of our big players have release clauses? I always worry about City or Madrid coming in for Saliba or Odegaard. No, I don't think so. Arsenal don't tend to like to have release clauses in their players' contracts, unlike other nations like Spain, where release clauses are mandatory, or rather were mandatory. You don't have to have that. you don't have to have those release clauses in the contract. So no, I don't think we do. Arsenal tend to avoid that as much as feasibly possible. Adam says, how many of the Invincible side would it take to win the league in your mind, and who? So the question is, how many Invincibles would you need to add to the team? I think the answer is one. Add Thierry Henry to this team in his prime and Arsenal win the league. I think I'd feel pretty confident saying that Thierry Henry and this Arsenal team would win us the league. So one, I think, is the answer. Honestly, I'm going to go one. I think that's the answer, Adam. Gunners Elite says, Tom, would you be disappointed if we sold Kiwior? I thought he did fairly well. I'd be disappointed in regards to like if he was sold, then did really, really well. But I do think that maybe he is a player that if Arsenal are looking to bring some money in this summer and you can get £30 million for Kiwior, then go and do it. I think that's what I would say about that. I think that's where we're going to end today's show. Actually, I think that's we've run our course, which is fine. Thank you for those that have tuned in today. Sunday's always a bit of a slow one, so thank you for those that have. If you could drop a like on the video and help us to reach 1,000 on the channel, that would be very much appreciated. We are very, very close now to hitting 57,000 subscribers on the channel as well. So if you are new and you've joined us, welcome first of all, and thank you for becoming part of this TGT family. We do these shows every single day at this time, every single morning, keeping you up to date with everything that's going on in the world of Arsenal. So welcome to those that are new, and thank you to all those that are existing and with us. So thank you for that. I'll end the show with this question from Z. It says, Tom, are all Arsenal friendlies set yet? Is there a chance they play some games in Europe besides the US Tour and the Emirates Cup? I have an article coming out about this today at midday. So make sure you look out for that. I've got some information about Arsenal's summer plans that will be coming out, a little bit later on today. So make sure you look out for that, Z, and I will answer your questions as best I can. Thank you for listening. Have a fantastic day. Enjoy yourselves. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal and stay strong, Super Kev.